He helped an old woman cross the street. Then she changed his life. The light had already turned green twice, and Marcus still hadn't moved. He sat parked at the curb outside the hardware store, staring at nothing in particular: the cracked sidewalk, the drooping banner of a diner across the street, the gray November sky pressing down on everything like a wet blanket. He'd been doing a lot of that lately, staring, sitting in his truck for 15 minutes before he could convince his body to go anywhere. It had been 4 months since the layoff. 4 months since he'd driven home in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, walked into the kitchen where his wife, Dana, was washing dishes, and told her that Hartwell Manufacturing had let go of 32 people, and he was one of them. She had dried her hands slowly on the dish towel. She hadn't cried. She had just nodded, like some part of her had been waiting for bad news and was relieved it was only this. That was the thing about losing a job at 47. It wasn't just the money. It was the way it rearranged everything you thought you knew about yourself. Marcus finally climbed out of the truck. He needed caulking for the bathroom tile, a small, almost embarrassingly domestic errand. He crossed the parking lot and turned onto the main sidewalk along Clement Street, hands in the pockets of his flannel jacket. The wind picked up, scattering a few dead leaves across the concrete. That's when he saw her. She was standing at the crosswalk at the corner of Clement and Fifth, just standing there while the walk signal cycled through, lit up white and then gone, lit up again and gone. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall on a generous day, with white hair tucked under a pale blue knit, hat and a canvas shopping bag, hanging from the crook of her elbow. She was looking at the street. The way you look at something you're trying to calculate, not afraid exactly, just thinking it through. Marcus slowed. The next walk signal came on and the old woman stepped off the curb, but the bag shifted and she grabbed for it, and her foot caught wrong on the uneven concrete edge. She didn't fall, she caught herself, but she stopped again, right there on the edge looking uncertain. Marcus didn't think about it. He just walked over. "Ma'am, can I help you across?" She looked up at him. She had dark eyes, sharp and clear, in a face that was deeply lined. She studied him for a second, the way older people sometimes do, like they're taking your full measure. "I'd appreciate that," she said. He offered his arm. She took it. They crossed together, slowly, and he matched her pace without being awkward about it. When they reached the other curb, he made sure she had solid footing before he let go. "Thank you," she said. "These old knees don't trust the pavement anymore." "Understandable," Marcus said. He started to turn back toward the hardware store, but she spoke again. "I'm going to the bakery on 5th. Do you know it?" "Pellegrino's. I've driven past it. Would you walk with me? It's half a block. I'll buy you a coffee." He almost said no. He had no real reason to. No job to get back to, no meeting, no urgency. But the reflex was there anyway, that modern habit of declining kindness from strangers. Then he looked at her, the canvas bag, the pale blue hat, and thought, why not? "Sure," he said. Her name was Eleanor Marsh. She was 81 years old and had lived in this neighborhood for 53 of those years. She had been a high school English teacher for 30 years, had 2 daughters who lived out of state, and had lost her husband, Ray, to a stroke 6 years ago. She told him all of this in the half-block walk to Pellegrino's. Not in a sad way, just the way someone tells you the facts of their life, when they've made peace with all of them. The bakery was warm and smelled like cardamom and butter. They sat at a small table near the window. She ordered 2 coffees and a slice of walnut cake without asking him, which made him smile for the first time and he couldn't remember. "So," Eleanor said, stirring her coffee, "what's troubling you?" Marcus looked up. "What makes you think something's troubling me?" "You were sitting in your truck for 11 minutes before you got out," she said. "I was watching from the bus stop. A man who has somewhere to be doesn't sit like that." He laughed, a short, surprised sound. "That obvious?" "To someone who's seen a lot of people, yes." He didn't mean to tell her everything. But something about Eleanor Marsh, maybe the directness of her, or the fact that she had no stake in his story and no reason to soften her responses, made it easy. He told her about the layoff. about the 3 interviews that had gone nowhere, about the way Dana had started working extra shifts at the hospital without making a thing of it, which somehow made him feel worse than if she'd been angry, about his son Tyler, who was 16 and starting to notice that something was wrong, and how Marcus didn't know what to tell him. Eleanor listened. She didn't interrupt, and she didn't rush to reassure him. When he finished, she cut a small piece of walnut cake and said, "Do you know what I did when Ray died?" "No. I sat in the house for 6 weeks. I had food brought to me. I watched television programs I didn't care about. I told myself I was grieving, which was true, but I was also hiding." She paused. "At the end of 6 weeks, my daughter called and said, 'Mom, I need you to do one thing this week. One thing outside that house.' I told her I'd think about it." "Did you?" "I went to the library. I'd always meant to volunteer there and never had. I walked in and told them I had 30 years of teaching English and I'd like to help." She smiled. "I've been there every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 years now. I work with adults learning to read. Grown men and women who never learned properly, coming in with their pride all wrapped around them like armor, and every single one of them is braver than they know." Marcus looked at his coffee. "I'm not comparing your situation to grief," Eleanor said. "But the shape of it is similar. There's a period where you stop, and then there has to be a period where you move again. Not because everything is fixed, just because moving is how you find out what's next." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep applying for the same kind of job. Same industry, same role, and I keep not getting it. Then maybe the same thing isn't what's next," she said simply. He didn't have an answer to that. They sat for another 20 minutes. She told him about one of her students at the library, a man named Gerald, 54 years old, who had hidden his inability to read for his entire working life and finally came in because his granddaughter had asked him to read her a book. Marcus found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed. Eleanor had a way of telling a story that made you feel like you were standing in the room. When they finally stood to leave, she wrote something on the back of a receipt from her canvas bag and handed it to him. "That's the library's number," she said. "They have a volunteer coordinator named Beth. Tell her Eleanor sent you. They also have a job board, community postings, small businesses, tradespeople. It's not LinkedIn, but it's real." He looked at the receipt. "I'm not sure I'd be any good at—" "You walked a stranger across a street when you didn't have to," she said. "That's the only qualification that matters for most things worth doing." She patted his arm once, picked up her canvas bag, and walked out into the gray afternoon. Marcus called the library 3 days later. He went in the following Tuesday. Beth, the coordinator, was a brisk woman in her 40s who put him to work immediately. Not with literacy tutoring. Not yet, but helping set up a new community bulletin system they were digitizing. It turned out 17 years of maintaining manufacturing. Inventory software translated reasonably well to database organization. Beth introduced him to a man named Phil Granato, who ran a small facilities management company and needed someone with exactly that kind of operational background. He interviewed with Phil on a Thursday. Phil offered him a job on a Friday. It was less than what he'd been making at Hartwell, but it was real and it was growing, and it put him in rooms with people who were building something. He told Dana that night at the kitchen table. She reached across and took his hand and held it, and didn't say anything because she didn't have to. He still volunteers at the library on Tuesday afternoons. He is not a teacher, and he is honest about that. He sits across from his students and says, "I'm just here to practice with you." And something about that lack of pretense seems to help. Gerald finished his first children's book last spring. Marcus was there when he did it. He has not seen Eleanor Marsh again, though he has looked for her at the corner of Clement and Fifth, on the days he drives that way. But he thinks about what she said often. Moving is how you find out what's next. It turns out she was right.